Oh, yeah. So we are live now. I just want to say thank you everybody. Sorry for the inconvenience there. Jerusa was a no-show, and we tried to bring in Will on the other live stream, but for some reason the software was not connecting. But we are here again, and if anybody could possibly go over to the other chat room and notify them to come here, so that way they're not sitting there for 5 minutes while they're missing out this important information that we got from Johan Fritz. So this is the second time we've had Johan on here, and I want to say thank you for coming on here, and thank you, audience members, for joining in. And I'm James Rink, by the way. This is Super Soldier Talk. We go into all sorts of things about the secret space program, alternate realities, and time travels, and so on, ET, extraterrestrial visitations. So Johann Fritz was in the Marine Corps, and he was picked up from Diego Garcia, then recruited into the secret space program as a Kruger officer at LOC, which is Lunar Operations Command. From there, he was transferred into the Mars Defense Force and later Nacht Waffen, extrasolar, which is the sector of the, I guess, quadrant of the galaxy that he was stationed in. And he has done a total of 40 years of service, and eventually even made up to executive level management aboard the USS Patton, and as well as CEO of the Franklin for another 15 years. Johan is able to remember more than other experiencers because he was able to resist the MK Ultra programming he was put through. He will be discussing the dynamics of the secret space program as well as answering audience questions. So this video is going to be a little bit shorter because Johan has to get up early, and this was a little bit off the wall schedule wise.
Yeah,
But
all good.
I do want to thank you for coming on here short notice, and you were showing this document, looks really quite fascinating, that was explaining, I guess, the structure of this SSP. So
So,
would you like to start with that, I suppose?
I guess first off, what I would like to describe is we were talking about the moon and how all of that stuff sort of operates in general, right? And the first part of it is you have a corporate structure that runs every planet, every planetoid, every known sector. For example, in our solar system, we have a corporation that runs the Earth, a corporation that runs the moon, a corporation that runs the belt, meaning the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn. They all have their different corporations because there are different groups that are in charge of figuring out how to monetize or get trade out of those particular planets or areas. All of these guys fall under what's called ICC, the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate, as CG would call that. And essentially, the picture I was showing was this was the original. I guess I can still do that, right? Yeah. No, not yet.
Sorry, this is my. Oh, okay. Actually, yeah, we're still on the same call. Go ahead, go for it.
All right, good.
Yeah.
So this was originally, this particular diagram is taken out of what we would call today Solar Warden. It was the lead up to SDI, and essentially the way this particular program was run was that they had to have people build up the backbone first off of the secret space program, meaning you had to have bases in order to bring people up there to different planetoids, different planets, different asteroids. These corporations listed on this document were some of the baseline companies where they brought executives, management, and operations people in to do that exact work. They developed technology, they developed ships, they developed base diagrams. More importantly, they had people come in from like Teledyne who actually did work with not only the rocket engines, but actual mining equipment too, what they call tunnel bore technology to create the actual tunnel boring mechanisms they used in some of the underground bases. Now, keeping this in mind, if you were to go on the moon and step into the room where these, and I think James and I kind of were joking around about the ICC and what it actually looks like in the meeting room. Essentially, you have this ellipse-looking table with 9 people sitting around it. 7 of these individuals are what we would call like basically heads of their own programs, and they all come together with the ICC and what's called JDFC. JDFC is the Joint Defense Command Forces, Joint Defense Forces Command. Sorry, my brain kind of jarred there. And those two groups essentially have jurisdiction when it comes to bases ICC and JDFC. But these other 7 programs have to come to the table, let them know what they're doing, how they're monetizing stuff, where they're getting trade from. If they need, for example, base support, you would see a particular program manager notify the ICC during one of these meetings that, hey, we need your ships to stop at this certain base location that we have because we're not getting refresh supplies there. This is where that meeting would happen. Now, you have to understand that these 9 individuals are kind of like mafia dons. That'd be a great way to describe them. Not that they're bad people, but when they come into this room, they're coming in this room, and there is a bit of tension between all of them because they're all vying for the same supplies, the same resources, in some cases, the same personnel. And you'll see this is why you see many experiencers talk about this idea that they've been reused through multiple programs, through multiple sections of time, because what's happening is these individuals are actually being lent out from, for example, from one program to another program. And then, for example, it might be lent from that program to the next program. And this is where you have, like with me, I got lent out among 3 different main programs, and then a 4th final program, which is where I got retired out of, like left the programs. So that being said, this is essentially the structure you're seeing on the screen. Now, some of these companies on this particular sheet, this was published in the 80s. Some of these companies no longer exist anymore. McDonnell Douglas got gobbled up by, I believe it was Northrop Grumman. You had Martin Marietta get gobbled up by Lockheed, and so on and so forth. But what this essentially shows you is the foundation for how the ICC essentially got formed. So that's the main group that kind of got everything kind of kicked off on the moon. Now, once they took over operations, the second thing that happened, one of the people they brought in and finally brought into the fold was the original people running groups like Waffen, who originally did not want to be under control of any of Earth's forces. Essentially, what they told them was, they said, you have a choice. Either you can continue operating your bases the way you want, or if you come under us, we will give you the option of allowing your people to be integrated back into the SSPs, and you'll be allowed to transfer into other programs. You'll be given clearance to do more work, so on and so forth. And you'll have your supplies refreshed on a more regular basis. All we request is that you give us access to the stuff you've been researching, any technology you may have developed, and give us the ability to copy blueprints. What that did was, is because Waffen had already been working with Vril and other groups, they essentially had this whole plethora of technology already kind of pent up that they were sitting on top of, and they didn't have the resources to build it. And these corporations we just showed in this picture essentially looked at these diagrams and said, this is some really cool stuff. Let's try to build some of this stuff. And they actually put program managers to work on it. And this is where ships like the Helen Coiter and the LeMay and some of these ships that you hear, again, CG and others talking about, that's where they came from. They essentially were designed under some of these same program designs, later modified by groups like Martin Marietta, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and others to make them more continually upgradable, was the phrase I used to hear a lot in the programs. And for anyone who works aboard a ship or anyone who works in a technology area, the ability to continually upgrade and revamp stuff becomes very important. Usually plug and play modules of some kind, right? Your radio equipment, your telemetry equipment, all of your weaponry, all that stuff can be modularly updated over time. So now, in my case, we're going to go over the ice. Do you want to go over the moon stuff first, or what goes on the moon?
Well, yeah, I think we just continue on this conversation is actually quite fascinating. But I was wondering, could you mentioned that they were trying to bring Waffen under some umbrella organization or something else.
Yes.
What was that?
That happened.
JDFC?
That happened. It actually, yeah, it happened under JDFC, and from what I understand, the Waffen was eventually, most of it, we're talking most of Waffen, not all of it. For example, Ceres, where you see Mr. Rodriguez, where he went, they were technically not under ICC control. They were a freelance, they would call them a freelance location. But the vast majority of Waffen eventually rolled underneath of ICC and JDFC because it became more monetarily easy to manage them. and they were getting regularly supplied. I mean, you think about some of these bases that got built out on Mars and elsewhere, they hadn't gotten regular refresh of supplies in a while. They were running very, very lean. And when ICC came in, all of a sudden now they're getting regular food, regular water. They're getting air circulators and scrubbers refreshed on a regular basis. The air didn't smell so thin. They're getting decent food. So that sort of stuff was very enticing for people. And the other thing that I would mention too is that we also at that point, this would have been like in the early to mid 80s is when Waffen got rolled underneath of ICC. We also saw the scope of the German expanse out of the solar system. So we knew at that point that we had what we call at that point, it wasn't a ninth planet, we would call it a 10th planetoid. And we also knew we also had this called Planet 10 now, right? That's what a lot of scientists are Planet 9, I guess, to exclude Pluto. There's a lot of discussion. We know for a fact on that base, the Germans already set up a monitoring, forward observation and listening post and a ship base there. Maki, which a lot of people have talked about in the Kuiper Belt, also has it's a refueling and repositioning base that's used by Waffen a lot. And there's other objects within the Kuiper Belt that they basically started mining and using as essentially as resources. And that's kind of what you start seeing happen with their expanse out. And the ICC recognized at that point the breadth of that whole program. They were quite shocked at the number of bases, how quickly they replicated those bases, how quickly they built those bases. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Germans brought their own slave labor, they brought their own equipment, and everything was brought in a very like mechanical kind of fashion. We knew we needed a base, so we used equipment, and boom, there's a base. Same way they built out some of their underground bases in Germany. If some of you know what Pindemon is, or some of the areas in northern Germany in the mountains where they were building the bases for Albert Speer during World War II, they built them in basically the same form and fashion, except they were using tunnel boring machines versus, hand labor. And the thing is, the other thing too is these slaves were highly technically trained slaves that were very, very good at what they did. So there's that part. Now,
Yeah. Question.
Go ahead.
Question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Why would Waffen want to be refreshed with supplies from Earth? If they have replicator technology?
So replicator technology didn't really come into full use until the mid 80s, at least from what I was told. The other thing is that they also wanted holodoc technology. They wanted to make an exchange because they wanted the ability to build people back up after they were either damaged in combat or after they took a serious injury. So at that point, there was an exchange made. They said, if you come back into the fold, we'll also give you holodoc regen tank technology for use on your ships and your colonies if you're willing to accept ICC oversight. And like I said, most bases were like okay with that because that gave them a guaranteed way to keep their people alive, regardless of whatever it is they may be running into. And when you're out in the middle of vast space, having the ability to have medical work done on you becomes extremely enticing, right? So I know that you and I both have been in certain super soldier programs, and those, when you're in a combat scenario, the idea of lingering with a wound for a while is not a very happy thought. So
next question. What is the annual quota of humans from planet Earth that are brought into the secret space program? If you happen to know it, that is.
When it started in the mid 80s, I believe it was somewhere around a three quarter of a million, and now we're up to about 1 million people abducted every year, planet wide. That's a lot of people, and essentially the way I'm told that they do it is not all these people leave Earth. So what they do is they'll take them to the moon and then return them back into their lives. This is where a lot of these, I'm going to call them staged abductions, might be happening, where they will take someone up, they will take ova or sperm samples to clone them, they will return the person back into normal life, and they give them the screen memory of it being a really bad dream with these shadow people staying at the end of their beds, and they don't know what to make of this dream. So it's the military and our SSPs are actually doing this to our own civilians because they need genetic material to create these clones. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, so they need the genetic stock.
Yes, and they want genetic diversity too.
Yeah, can you comment about this? Because Penny Bradley said that the quota was 50,000 people. I'm assuming that was when it all began around the
Yes.
1950s with, I guess,
Yeah.
Eisenhower
End of
was setting
World
this up.
End of World War II up through the 50s, it was very slow trickle. They had what they call the brain drain around that same time, where you had a bunch of scientists basically leave Earth, and they were sidetracked into these SSP programs through people like William Tompkins, where they were brought up to the LOC, and then from there they were kind of split out as to what programs they went to work on. And you see a lot of these individuals where they're testing out a lot of this very kind of fringe edge technology out there, so it's not destroying stuff here in case it blew up, right? A lot of weapons and engine technology, specifically thrust and propulsion technology.
What are the signs, subconscious signs for the individuals who were participating in this program and had their memories wiped? Is there any way that a
Yes.
clear sign? What do you think that would be?
The first thing that I would say is, okay, so obviously we talked last time, we talked about what are the reasons why they would abduct you, right? And Ted and I basically agreed on three primary triggers. One, the person has a certain genetic lineage. They have that genetic metagene that makes it important for them to interface with technology. Two, they're an intuitive empath. That basically means that they have the ability to telepathically and empathically link with other beings and transfer consciousness and intelligence and communication with them. And third and finally, the third and final part is, what is their psychological temperament? Meaning, if you take a person and you train them, are they going to be able to withstand being in combat, taking orders, and also thinking on their feet sometimes? Do they have the ability to step outside of stuff? The fourth thing that I actually also was looking at too is that there are certain specific gene stocks. For example, German, Viking, a lot of the royal families in Europe, these gene stocks already have a certain amount of intermixed Draco DNA in their blood. This is where this idea of people, all those crowns, they wear what's called moldavite in the crown, right? And that moldavite is called the dragon scale. And it's actually shown as a sign of royalty and command. But what it actually is, what I was told, is that that particular stone on certain people is actually a psionic amplifier when it's in their auric field. So this is something that Draco knew, and it's a way for them to mark certain people that they may be able to use those abilities. And people that have that genetic metagene, meaning the psionic metagene, they have that ability to manipulate and use that technology. This is why you'll see some people, when they talk about the arm, they do the arm drawings for the implants. That's how they're able to use those implants, is they have that metagene in their system already, and they can just turn that gene on and boom, the implant actually works.
That's fascinating. Can you comment about what percentage of these abductees are used as slaves now in the
Well,
present era?
what I would say today is that that number has been steadily going down. And what I also know from what I've been told from other folks and what I know from my memory is that planets, we actually started moving out those slave operations out of our solar system to extrasolar locations, specifically planets like 70 Virgus B and other locations, because that's outside the solar system. And if there was disclosure, they could basically say, oh, well, we don't have that going on in our solar system right now, blah, blah, blah. But 70 Burgess B is a huge cloning facility. They clone every species in the man and they exchange them there. And we have a lot of agreements via the ICC to do that. We have our merchant marine vessels that come there, and all they do is load up cattle cars and take these species to other species and basically sell them, trade them, exchange them. Now, you asked about a number. I would say probably out of that 1 million number, you're probably looking at less than 0.01%. So maybe 10 to 20,000 people are being used as slaves, probably in the current era. The reason why that number has went down is because when they started using Orion's cube technology, some of you guys know what that is. They crack open the skull to see the spirit and the soul, to look at the actual soul development of this being, and can this being withstand being put in an environment like being around a Draco or another species, right? And what ends up happening is if that particular soul shows a high degree of what they call divergence, meaning it actually will cause timeline issues or ripples, they won't abduct them. They won't leave them out of the timeline. They'll take a sample of them and then clone them for later use. If that individual shows very little ripple, then they can actually take them out of the timeline and use them elsewhere. And that's usually what the filter is between someone who is kept in timeline and someone who's moved and used in the programs for long periods of time. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, I'm following you as best as I can on that one. I think some audience members that may have been over them, but you know what? We're all learning here,
Oh,
so yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah, especially with the timeline ripples. But it's kind of hard for most people to grasp that anyway. But I think you
Well, we
explained
can
it.
talk about this really quick. Time is circular, it's not linear. All time is happening now. And for humans, that's very confusing because we're used to this idea of linear time that occurs in a timeline. Now, here's the thing. If you create a change at point A early in the timeline, point B later in that timeline will fluctuate and change, which is what we call a timeline foldback. And again, CG talked about this when he's talking on Gaiam about these corrections that have happened in different segments of time in the Mandela effect, right? We see this happening where the timeline folds back on itself and it corrects because earlier events have happened. And the phrase they actually use in the program set is called what's called temporal operations, where they actually will send in one or two people to do a particular job, and then they bring them back through a looking glass jump pad back into our timeline. And the whole idea is that they're in there for 5 minutes and they come back trying to create the minimal amount of ripple possible within the current timeline or the current time as we see it circularly speaking, right? Hopefully that didn't confuse too many people.
And that's what they're doing. These 20-year and backs.
Yes, that's exactly
Minimal
what they're doing.
timeline ripples. Okay. All right. And so if you were involved in this and you wanted to get your memories back, do you have any advice for these individuals?
So the two things I've typically submitted to people in terms of what would be advice from me, I work as a counselor, and what I would tell people is the first thing you want to look up is someone who is metaphysical in terms of their spiritual belief set, and they either do what's called PHR, post-hypnotic regression, or what they call QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis therapy. Those two particular branches of hypnosis are highly usable when trying to help people gain back what they call trauma memory. Now, this is great for people if they've suffered, for example, if you had like spousal abuse, right? Or if you had abuse as a kid where you have certain memory areas in your mind that are blocked because of said trauma. Well, guess what? It also works for stuff for people in the programs. Now, for those of us that have been in the programs, you have to take care. If you think you've been in, omega level programming is extremely critical to know in your mind when you're talking to your therapist. Say, look, I may have been in something like this with the government. If you hear this come up, make sure that you diffuse whatever that is, because you have to make sure that you're not putting this person in a situation when that containment gets violated, that they're not trying to suicide themselves. And that's what omega programming is essentially. It causes that person to start having these repeated suicidal thoughts to do something to themselves all the time.
Thank you for sharing that. All right. So I guess you can go ahead and continue on your discussion here with the, did you want to go into LOC now?
Sure. So I actually was stationed at the LOC off and on for a little bit when I was with Kruger. We also did training and missions on Mars as well. For those people who don't know, Mars is kind of like the SSP boot camp. If you're going to go into a combat arms area of the SSPs, you go to Mars at some point. Because what they try to do is they try to get you indoctrinated in your own program first. They take you to Mars, and that's where they give you all your weapons training, all your suit training, all your armor training. If you're doing what they call jump pod insertion, which is like an orbital pod insertion, they'll have you do orbital insertions there from Deimos. And they have a lot of other things they do there that are specifically tailored to the programs and how they run those programs. But the idea is that for me, I went to Kruger first. When When I got brought into the programs, they put me through MK Ultra. I already been through parts of it as a kid. They activated it on the moon, and basically I was brought into this room. I was given what was called a hollow visor update, which they put this thing on your, they give you a, let me back up for a second. They give you a drug, which essentially puts you in a hypnagogic state. They put these visors on you and they start doing what they call uploads, which is essentially, they start by using a differential pattern on the eyes, one video in one eye, one video in the other, and then it actually starts uploading information to the brain. And that's why they train you. They actually upload the information directly into your cranium that way. For me, after I went through a period of that, we had to test every 72 hours whether the training took. They would do what's called a full recall test. They would take you out to this room and they would give you a weapon, and you had to actually act using the weapon on a target. I passed all those tests. And then I got selected to go into what's called Kruger, the Kruger Mercenary Corps, which, as you mentioned in the previous intro, Kruger's actually a German group. And interestingly enough, the first actual real training we did was in a place called Vemork, Norway, which, if you've ever watched Hunting Hitler with Bob Baer, one of the episodes that he does is actually at the power plant in Vemork where they were producing heavy water. And that plant is actually, to the left of that plant is actually the entranceway down into a Draco basis there. And I know that we've been running operations trying to figure out what they're doing there, but that base was actually used as a, what they called a further on training program base for Kruger. And interestingly enough, when I got brought back to the moon, that's when they started actually doing, they would do all kinds of programs there. Like we had the one we did what's called a dog and pony show, right? So what they do is they bring a bunch of us Kruger guys and women out into this foyer-way right in front of the office, which the office way, by the way, looks like a corporate office on Earth with these big posters of guys in Kruger armor looking all, kind of, gruff and tough. And they would have us standing behind this little purple cordon that went the full way up, and they'd have like 10 of us out there, and they'd bring out all of these what we called heavy hitters, all these big politicians, billionaires, anyone who's involved with either using Kruger for their own resources and needs, or they were paying to actually support Kruger. You see a lot of countries that did this because they wanted these super soldiers to do work for them, if that makes sense to everyone. And what we would do is we'd be standing there in these, I was telling Ted this, that's the first time I ever publicly got groped by a female in the military, was at one of these dog and pony shows. A known female politician, Hillary Clinton, walked up and grabbed me by the junk and said, does their shit work? And basically what she said to my commanding officer, and he's like, yes. And Bill Clinton was standing right there, and he's talking to another guy staying next to me, and they were like touching our armor, seeing, because we were in 2.0 bodies at this point. So that's the other thing people have to understand. Kruger, you're transferred from your primary biological body, and that essence is transferred over to a clone body where you're essentially trained to use that clone body for the duration of the time you're in Kruger, if that makes sense to people. And sometimes they make multiples of that body in case you get damaged or injured. But the point is that at this point, I'm in a 2.0 body wearing very heavy black, look like composite body armor. And we did quite a few of those dog and pony shows. We also did when we did, like, they called meet and greets. They would have like all the programs come into this big auditorium room, and they would actually have military officers from Earth come up to these rooms, and they would actually have us standing around the room. They would actually, because they want to see what their money was actually buying. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope. And they would have us come in, and they would actually have to stand up on stage for a little while, and our commanding officer would actually, answer a bunch of questions, and these guys could come up and they could look at us, talk to our commanding officer, who is my commander was actually a very buff looking Japanese guy. But anywho, the idea is that these guys wanted to see what their money was buying. We even did ship flybys in that same auditorium because the large glass window behind us, and they'd have ships actually come by that area so people could actually see the ship passing by. But again, a lot of times the LOC, you're dealing with higher level stuff. So when I got transferred out of Kruger, I eventually went to MDF. I did training in MDF for a while, and then I got transferred from MDF out to Nacht Waffen, and I went to they call Radiant Glory, which was the upgrade from Radiant Guardian, and Radiant Guardian was the upgrade to Solar Warden. So it's what some people are now calling the Alliance. I don't know why they're calling it the Alliance, but that's what they call it. So I was a part of that group for a little while. The point being that we had a lot of meetings on the moon at that point. When I became what they call an executive officer and a commanding officer, we did a lot of meetings with this group that I was mentioning earlier, the ICC and the Triumvirate, which is this corporate group, the 9 guys that I mentioned earlier. We would go into these meetings, and you have a point guy for every program. And behind that person, there's 3 people who are basically acting as support officers for that individual. So anytime they got into an argument, the supporting people had to basically provide anything that guy needed or that person, a woman needed, in order to basically win their argument. They had to have everything right there. Glass pads have a lot of it, but the guy that I served, this admiral who essentially was in charge of my program, he actually liked to bring in what he called enforcer types, which all 3 of us had served in Kruger, because we all had these reps, and they brought us in. They would have us sit behind him, and it intimidated a lot of the other program managers, because they're like, oh God, we know who those guys are. And they didn't want to argue with him, which meant he got his way usually when he had to fight for resources or whatever. The idea being that you have these groups that are essentially vying for all this time, energy, money, resources, and they're trying to do it in a way that gets the most for them. So
I got a ton of questions.
Okay.
But first of all, I want to start off with this. I'm going to share my screen in just a
Okay.
moment. So this, according to Peter the Insider, you can ignore all this other stuff. This right there, this is the logo for Kruger.
That's
according
correct.
to Peter. Can you confirm it's actually pointed down like that?
Yes, that's correct.
And did it have this other stuff around it? These other blocks? Or was it just this symbol?
I remember it being in black, and I remember it being in silver. I don't remember the background so much, but I do remember that being the actual symbol for it. Yes.
So all this together.
Yeah, I would say that the outline and the internal symbol is very accurate. Yes. And
So-
also too that game. If you look at the arm, she has the implant on her arm, and in that game, she's technically considered a super soldier asset. Technically, she's playing as a super soldier asset. So it doesn't surprise me. Soft disclosure.
Yeah. Peter the Insider told me the story about this lady, and maybe I think it might have been in Toronto, who was playing this game, and she was a Kruger asset that actually had this tattooed onto her, these cyborg tattoos, which I guess
well, they're interfacing tattoos is what they're actually called. And the technology, what it does is it allows you to either ramp up certain biological assets in your body, or it allows you to actually use certain technology that's around you. When I was talking to Peter myself, one of the things he mentioned to me is that I apparently liked to run parkour at the LOC to test out implants. This guy we called Dr. N in Kruger, what he would do is that he would essentially give me a new implant, and I would go run parkour through the whole base with the security guys chasing me in tow until I got back to the Kruger office. And they'd say, oh, he's one of ours. And I come back into the office, and they would, put the next implant on or whatever they wanted to do. And we had guys who did this stuff because we were trying to make sure that in combat, we knew this particular implant gave us the correct output that we wanted, the correct sort of diagnostic feel that we wanted, right? Because all this stuff essentially augments the individual to make them smarter, stronger, bigger, better, right?
Well, anyway, so I guess the ending of that story is that she got triggered, and when she was triggered, her super soldier alter only understood 2 things, either friend or enemy. And so she was with her family, but the cyborg side of her didn't recognize that as a friend, so she eliminated her family. So at that point, they had to send the MIB in. They cloned the bodies. They sent. I think they might have actually sent her back in time. They went back in time, reset it all, and tried to clean everything up. So the moral of the story is apparently this stuff really is real, and that means I guess electronic arts is in they must have connections with Kruger, or maybe people from Kruger actually works there.
Yes. And the other side of that too is you see this also in movies and music videos too, right? So look at Osiris Child, a very good soft disclosure movie where you see not necessarily the actual dialogue so much, but if you're watching the background, there's all kinds of soft disclosure in the background of that movie. So
What's it called?
Osiris Child.
Child?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting sci-fi movie that talks about this guy who works on a mining and prison planet. And there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the background. If you watch the technology and what they're doing, it's actually a yeah, that's the movie. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in that movie. It's what I would call soft disclosure, all kinds of crap in that movie.
Huh.
But you have to pay attention to it to really get what's actually going on in terms of the technology. The technology is what I'd pay more attention to versus the actual people or the dialogue.
Excellent. So let me get back to some of these questions. First question is, did you sign a contract when they brought you?
I did, yes. Something else they asked me too, once I got to the LOC, when I signed the contract on Earth, I signed it while I was in boot camp. What they did was they gave me what they called a word. It was a keyword. And that keyword is what allowed me to actually get trained on the moon and then continue into my further training. I had to remember this like mnemonic keyword that was associated with certain things, but go ahead.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I might have access to my own keyword. I was wondering what that was. Okay, next question.
Glad to help you.
Did you know you were in another body when they had you in 2.0?
Yes, because I actually had memories of waking up in the other tube, looking over at my sleeping self when they actually put that sleeping self in stasis. They actually moved it into stasis. And I remember stepping out of that tube in a 2.0 body, and essentially the doctor was like having me do all these reflex tests where they would have me do like the hands, the eyes, the jumping, the push-ups, basically a full PT test to see what was going on with my body. Did I feel everything okay? And then they actually put me into armor, and they actually had me run a full armor and weapon test at that point. Because essentially the term they use in that particular program, transfer what they call the essence, which is the part of the conscience that allows you to actually do the mission. In some cases, they do a full essence transfer, which is the full ego transfer, but not always. Sometimes they only transfer what they call the alter into the actual sleeve, which is the clone body, if that makes sense to anybody.
Do they ring you up like this, these clones?
I have seen rings like that. Those are used for medical examinations and upgrades, especially when you have a body where they're going to be inserting cybernetics. They will do one of these. They also have a smaller ring. It's about this big around. And that ring is actually used to do what's called a temporal, mental, and physical scan of the body. They can actually sample you that way. And that's how they actually get a synaptic map of you when they're going to return you back into your timeline. Is they use that temporal map to actually regress you back to that point, and then they remap your brain sort of. And this is why you also have failures too, right? So if you have someone who has certain synaptic bridges built up in the brain, the actual temporal mapping software will fail because that temporal mapping link is too strong and they can't remove it or regress it. So this is how recall occurs. You have that little pathway, that one little pathway that has some linkage to that particular memory that pulls up that dream, that memory, that trigger, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Well, the reason I brought that up is because when I was at LLC, they named me James Ring, Ring, and I was wondering if maybe they gave me the last name Ring because they would ring me up like that and put the cybernetics, the heat-seeking implant in the left eye.
So another good movie to look at when you're looking at super soldiers and how they program them and work with them, look at the Winter Soldier used in the Captain America movies put out by Marvel. That is actually a really good rendition of a super soldier programming technique that they renditioned in a movie. Now, again, it's been Hollywoodized, but that is actually a really good version of how they would have done it in terms of the whole mnemonic list the guy had in the red book, where they actually read off the words and the mnemonic characters to get them to mentally entrain to what's being said, and then you slip right into the altar. That's exactly how they used to do it. Now they use 3 flashing green and 1 red light with a certain binaural tone to do it now. Yeah, and Bucky, who's the Winter Soldier, he's the guy that I'm primarily focusing on, because he's the guy that they program all the time. After they recall him from a certain mission, they ask him what his mission status is, and then they basically put him in this thing around his head where they immediately regress him back, and they wipe him, they clean start him again. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Okay, so what? It's not the Captain America's. It's
No, it's Bucky. Yeah, it's Bucky.
I guess the antagonist in that movie. Okay,
Yep.
so all right, okay. Thank you for that. Next question. What did Hillary Clinton use you for?
I was never physically used by her, but she quote unquote inspected us, her and her husband, because the U.S. was walking through with some senators who I could name, and they were essentially walking up and looking at every single one of the super soldiers behind this purple cordon. And essentially what they were looking at was they were giving my commanding officer, they gave him essentially said, yes, we're going to be using your guys for work. We need to make sure that certain things stay under wraps, and we want you guys to help us make sure it stays under wraps. Are you willing to take that work on? And of course, our command was like, well, of course, that's what we're here for, mercenary corps. And at that point, we got loaned out to some of these other groups to do cleanup missions, basically. Sometimes the cleanup missions, sometimes it was tracking assets, sometimes it was dealing with people who were trying to what's the word I want to use here? They were trying to exploit or extract information from other assets within the programs or on Earth. We do have some of those who work within the programs on Earth, and our job was to make sure those assets were secure. So
thank you. Next question. Which countries wanted to use Kruger?
Most of the countries that are now in EU -2, the United States, Canada, Mexico, Japan, China, Russia, and India. Those are the ones I know right off the top of my head. I think Pakistan was kind of in there too, but India was a heavy hitter, so is China. And the reason why is because they had a lot of resources and money they could funnel into a program like Kruger, and they had a lot of stuff to clean up. They wanted to make sure certain things did not get out into the open, as it were.
So why does Kruger need money if they have replicator technology?
Well, because what would happen is Kruger actually, they had what they called planetary funding, quote unquote, if that makes sense to anybody. And that money was essentially used to essentially trade for what they really wanted, which was the technology they needed in the programs. They really didn't spend money per se, but it was kind of like having like a slush fund where you knew you had a certain amount of resources in there, and you can use that to get the actual hardware and technology you need to keep your guys viable in the programs. That's essentially the way our commander always looked at it. It was always like, the more resources we can get our hands on, the more viable our guys will be going forward. And they always were trying to get better weapons, better armor, better protection, better implants, better doctors who could make this stuff. And they were always pulling people out of Earth corporations to do all of that.
Was there any discussion about compensating any of the veterans after they returned back to planet Earth?
Okay, so the way I'm going to answer that question is this: as far as the programs go, no. I have had conversations with certain political parties here in the United States in the here and now, where after I did a talk with Ted on the Red Pill Cafe, an individual from a certain political camp, a senior advisor, sent me an email and essentially asked me about the top 5 issues that he saw in concerns to the program, because apparently that candidate watched a couple of our videos and believed what we were saying after what he had seen from Guy MTV, from us, from Tony Rodriguez, from you, a whole bunch of people. They've been watching these videos. And essentially the idea was that the 3 big issues they found was, how do we keep Earth secure? How do we compensate veterans who've been in the programs and get their medical and psychological needs taken care of? And more importantly, what about the slaves that are off planet, and how do we reintegrate them back into our society or not? And that those three subjects we talked about, I even wrote some policy letters for them about that stuff. That if it ever came out, this is what I would do. So, and reparations to the vets, by the way, was a part of that. Giving them quality medical care, medical and psychological, and giving them reparations for pay for the number of years served.
Yeah. So, but that would mean they would have to acknowledge not only these projects exist, but they certainly have to acknowledge
the idea being this is post disclosure, right? There's no way a candidate would ever talk about this unless it went post disclosure. So we're talking about what would happen if these records and this discussion actually went mainstream and it was post disclosure. How do we handle this? And I've always said this from day one is that 2021, 2022, that's the beginning of this window where we're going to start seeing major disclosure probably happening, for the simple fact that in the other time when I was in the SSPs, that's where we saw big major shifts happening political here in the US. So,
well, okay, go into another question. Does Kruger or group within the SSP, is there an actual account where the money's there for to compensate the vets that has not been
no, they don't track it per asset or anything like that. Like I said, it's a slush fund. When they get these resources in, they treat it like a giant slush fund. And the only way they would ever use that stuff is with an earthbound corporation is building stuff for them, or to get people to come from Earth up to their program. Because they're looking for qualified people all the time, physicists, biologists, botanists, all these guys and ladies that know how to do these types of STEM type backgrounds that they cannot just generate somewhere up in space, right? But the bigger picture is in terms of the reparations side of this, there's not a, they know the number of years served. And what I recommended was looking at the current pay rate at the rate at which that person was working at in the SSPs and in your rank. They should give that person a payout based on the rank in which they left the programs once their actual records are declassified during that moment of disclosure. They should be given the choice, do you want reparations and or do you want medical and psychological care generated by the stuff you went through in the programs? Because think about the amount of psychological damage that program assets have, having gone through MK Ultra, Monarch, and all this other stuff, right? So in some cases, it's pretty horrific. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming in most cases, most people only went through a 20-year and back and then were returned, and then they went on to looking for another individual. Now, can they, would they recycle the same person over and over and over? Was that quite often the case?
If that individual showed promise in the way they could use technology, weaponry, and training, meaning they had the ability to grow, they would absolutely regress a particular, physically regress an individual back to a certain age and reuse them over and over and over again within a certain amount of time. But the bottom line is when you're done working in that program, whether you do 20 or like in my case, you do 40, they have to reinsert you within 5 to 10 minutes of when they extracted you out of the original timeline. Because that's when you start seeing this fluttering in the timeline effect. And some people, not really me, but some people might actually create a huge flutter. And that's where you start seeing these snapbacks happen later on in time. And people are like, well, what happened to this person? And the bottom line is that individual was probably abducted at some point and taken off the planet. And this is why we're seeing in the US, I mean, you look at the US, Canada, and the EU, the statistics alone last year were 1 million people went missing. So we can say a chunk of those individuals are definitely now off the planet. We know this because for those of us that have been in the programs, we've seen what the inside of a merchant marine galley looks like when they're bringing these individuals off the planet. That's how I was brought off the planet. So, I mean, we know it happens.
Yeah, I just assume the people that go missing were probably being eaten by the certain groups of regressive races. Because I mean, if they're using the 20-year and back, they could keep their slate. Or also, they take people that die in like plane accidents or like in Beirut when we saw that huge explosion. So a lot of those people could have been picked up. They could have stopped time momentarily and picked them all up. So yeah, so it would probably be more than just the missing people.
So I'm going to say this really quick, but I'm not going to stick necessarily on this topic for very long because I know it does trigger people a little bit. Yes, there are races that do in fact actually like the taste of human flesh. And yes, there are certain groups within subsects of those species. For example, if you look at the Inguinoid sect, that was a subsect of the Draco, they specifically love human carcasses and flesh. And what I would say is, yes, when you're talking about this idea of removing somebody out right before a disaster occurs, that's absolutely possible. And even if you get like a minute DNA sample from that person, we all know what regen tanks can do. If you have a minute DNA sample in a good working regen tank, you can rebuild the whole body. All you need is essence to transfer in there to get a baseline operatable human being to walk out of that tank at some point. So
yeah, and certainly they could insert other types of DNA and create whether as long as it had some of your own, the original, they can change and alter that.
Well, and this is exactly why you see people like Emery Smith, who he worked at what we call a processing logistics center for the ICC. And essentially what they did was they took this other DNA that you're talking about from these samples they would get out in the field from like what guys like me would send to them via these merchant marine vessels. They would process that material and then figure out how to store it, maintain it, and or use it for further use.
Interesting. Can you comment if the posters at this Kruger office were in English or in German?
Actually, I remember them being in German, but I know for a fact they actually had only if you know what the black glass pads look like, they had the ability, if you flash the pad up in front of the poster, it would auto translate all the text for you anyhow. So even if these guys couldn't read German, they could put the pad up in front of it and see what it actually says. I mean, but I remember it being in German.
They also have the implants that allow you to hear German.
Yep. So you hear German, speak German. Yep.
Fascinating. Okay. All right. Excellent. And I had one more. Oh yeah. Were the personnel at the office human or ET or mixed?
Both. And we had hybrids there too. So I'll go into this real quick. So the guys who were my direct commanding officer was a Terran human, or had been at some point Terran human. He was a Japanese guy, and essentially his job was to maintain the rosters for each of the Kruger companies that worked underneath his command there. And we actually had a section of the LOC that was just Kruger. All we did was training there. We had our own floor. Unless you were part of Kruger, you didn't go there. Secondly, when you get indocked, what they call indock at the LOC, indoctrinated, you're already being exposed to certain ETs at that point, non-terrestrial beings at that point. My case, when I walked in and they did the initial temporal scan and all the stuff at the moon, we had a tall white, a Draco, and 2 Zeta Reticulans standing in the room, all working together psionically, trying to figure out how to get a temporal signature of me and do certain work on me to get me ready for my next stage. And that was after I gave them that keyword we talked about earlier.
Yeah, interesting. Because the reason I brought that up is because through regressions, I've been able to reach out to some of the personnel on LLC, and it appears that some of them are like Draco shapeshifters that look human, but they are. So I'm assuming that also takes place as well.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And this is actually how, okay, so let's talk about this for a minute, because people get into this weird mind funk when they start talking about what we call the cabal or the Illuminati. So let's explain how this works really quick. You have sectors of human endeavors, for example, the media, movie production, music production, the news. You have these individuals at high levels of power. And essentially what they're doing is they're being talked to by a hybrid, a Draco hybrid that interfaces with them. They may be using holographic technology, maybe not, but in many cases are using their psionic abilities to manipulate these individuals to do a certain agenda. And all of these hybrids are reporting back to what they call a planetary prince, the guy who runs the show. Earth has one. A lot of other planets have them as well. And that's essentially the pyramid structure of how the Cabal or the Illuminati works. You have these hybrids that are essentially doing all the footwork for the prince, and the prince is reporting back to the queen saying, Your Majesty, this is the current state of affairs on the Earth. This is how many people we currently have. This is the current state of affairs with our control of these certain groups, so on and so forth. And that's essentially his job, is to make sure those reports happen in a timely manner back to the queen, who, from what I understand, she got recently replaced. But the queen that I remember, she didn't tolerate insubordination or untimeliness very well. So,
right. Thank you. We're wrapping up here some of the questions about LLC.
okay.
We got another one here. How do you cope about what you've been through?
I went through a 1.5 years of counseling and post-hypnotic regression. I went through a lot of something else I didn't talk about earlier, which is also very good, is having people do body work on you, massage. For those of us that have been in the programs, we tend to trap a lot of our triggers and our memories in muscle memory, what we call muscle memory. And having somebody actually work on those areas of the body actually helps release those chemical triggers trapped in the muscle. I did a lot of that too. And what I found was, over time, as I worked with this woman to help me get this stuff kind of worked out of my system, or at least get some portion of recall back, I actually got to the point where, during the recall, by the way, I didn't remember anything. She did not allow me to consciously remember at that time. She allowed it to kind of come back over time. That makes sense to people. Where I started actually seeing it was in the recall notes that she gave me a copy of at one point, and I converted it into electronic notes before I had a flood in my apartment. But not the point. The point is, the electronic notes survived, and that's where I actually started seeing my own words being, sitting right in front of me talking about this stuff, and I was a little shocked. Specifically, the very first memory I had, which was about me actually speaking in German, and I've never spoke a lick of German in my life. And here I am speaking full-blown German. She actually had to take the German to a friend of hers who actually taught at WVU. And he actually told her, well, that's a very particular dialect of German that hasn't been spoken since 1942. It comes from one specific area in Germany, and it has not been spoken since then, because that town was pretty much wiped off the map because of what happened during World War II and the Allies rolling into Germany. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, what? But here it is in black and white. She actually talked to the guy. She had the side note, everything. So yeah, it was very, very interesting to me.
Some interesting confirmation there. So next question, does a soul have a choice if they die and the SSP wants their essence?
No, because if they have, let me rephrase my statement. If you have a body that's in stasis, or you're in your original body, or the original body is alive somewhere, the essence of that alter or the essence transferred will always rehome back to the original body upon death of the clone, almost in every single instance. And that's what we call this rehoming effect. And this is where people start getting recall. When you talk to people who do shamanic work, I know you've had some folks on here on your show who do shamanic work. This is where the idea of soul fragments come from, is these little slivers, these subsections of our ego, these alters that are out there. And when the clone actually passes or dies or has died, it makes its way back to the human mind, and we have to figure out how to reintegrate it back into the primary conscious. So not only do we know the memories involved in that and the trauma involved, we know how to actually heal that part of who we are.
Thank you. Question from the audience. Can you tell us the name of Earth's planetary prince and the name of the queen?
No, I'm not speaking those names out loud. No. Sorry. Here's the reason why. Because their particular language has a psionic component to it. When you speak it out loud, you're drawing that energy to you. And the last thing I want is some 13-foot tall Draco white
Well
showing up in my house. No. No, thank you.
Well said. I agree. Okay, so we'll just wish them the best and whatever path they're on. Okay.
We'll let them go on their merry way, and we shall continue talking. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Can you someone keeps asking about Tanya and her gravity phobia. Did you train somebody by the name of Tanya?
Yes. Her name was actually Tanya LaRue. Actually, this is a kind of an interesting side note. She was actually a genetic clone of a lady by the name of Betty Page, a well-known model back in the 30s. Very beautiful, buxom brunette. And I remember the physical body of the clone, and the individual was actually brought into that physical body. That's her. And essentially what had happened was Tanya was essentially originally working for a group who was part of the SSP, and she was an intelligence asset gathering information. The first time I ran into her, she was actually talking to the Lyrans, trying to regain or get a copy of this green gas that actually destroys what's called the black goo. It's a black AI nanite virus that comes from a distant solar system about 13.4 billion years from here. And the asset actually had gotten a copy of the gas and was trying to get out, and she got caught. And eventually the Draco, who are running the colony, because the Lyrans don't technically really run the colony, the Royals allow the Draco to do all the security there. The Draco actually took her into custody, and my ship, which was a Black Ops ship, was actually asked to go in and extract her out of this place called Hammerhead Station, which is a supermax security facility the Draco use. And we had to go in and basically bust her out, get the gas, and do a whole bunch of other crap. And it was just really messy. The Draco did not like me after that, but again, they don't like me anyhow. So what do you do?
But
okay.
Can you?
So
was this the original Betty? The original Betty or the clone?
Tanya? Tanya, the clone. And they actually cloned that body, and they gave the individual, he actually had been transferred into her body. So there was some, I guess you'd call it, what's the phrase we're looking for here? Sexual dysphoria. He wasn't used to being in a feminine body, probably initially. But the idea is that there were some quirks with some of the clones too. Like in this case, the individual who was Tanya didn't like gravity so well. Certain types of gravity boots. If you've ever been in the programs, you know what gravity boots are, mag boots, because you use them on board ship all the time, because the mag plating in the deck actually holds you to the floor and gives you a sense of gravity. Also too, you use them in combat when you go to 0G combat too. So, and that's where folks who don't do well with different types of gravity, maybe like Tanya, probably had some issues there, because you could get very quickly disoriented in a 0G environment, or even a heavy G environment. But go ahead.
So is that part of the contract with Kruger? That they'll tell you we could put you in a female body, or vice versa?
They can do that. Some of the other programs did that too. You look at MDF, it happened there a few times that I know of. I know it happened in what we call Alliance, which is the last program I was in, and they did it there. A lot of the intelligence assets were all clones, because again, we talk about this rehoming process, right? If you have an asset off planet, even if they kill the asset, that information eventually comes back to the person. All they have to do is extract the info once they regain knowledge that asset is dead. Once that information comes back to the original body, they can say, okay, now pull up the memory. Whoop, here it is. And they now have all the intelligence that clone now had. And that's why the Draco don't want to kill an asset, because if they kill them, it immediately rehomes back to the original body. And they know this.
So are you suggesting, because I spent 75 years on Mars under the name of Colonel Derek Reinhold. So that body is probably still in stasis. Otherwise, the memories would come back to me if they exterminated it.
I don't know. So the thing that I would say is that when you're looking at whether a clone is still alive or not, that's where PHR or QHHT comes into play, because what you're actually looking for under either one of those two scenarios, you're looking to see if there's any sort of quantum entanglement memory wise between you and that particular clone asset or body or mind. Meaning that if you're having memories over here in your current mind, your here and now mind of that asset being there, and all of a sudden you're able to interact with the other mind and the other body, that means there's quantum entanglement. That means the body's still alive. And at that point, you either have to have that asset terminate, which can be done remotely, or you have to figure out how to separate quantumly between the two, between your body and the actual asset body, which also can be done too, but takes a lot of work.
Thank you. Much appreciated. So the last question I have on my list here was, does Kruger have bases on planet Earth?
Yes. Yes, they do.
Probably.
Base 211, base 211 was the primary one originally. Yeah, for those people who don't know about Neuschwabenland, that would be the first place I would look, because when Germany went to get all their forces, including Maria Orsic and the Vrilddamen that went with her off planet, that was the first place they started training these quote unquote the first gen super soldiers that came out of Germany, right? And those soldiers essentially were trained at base 211, which is what we call now the Neuschwabenland German base, right? The other facility that I know for certain is, again, this place in Vermork, Norway, which essentially was a heavy water production facility for the Germans during World War II. And that location, I was told that they've done a ton, the Draco have done a ton of work there, but originally that was a Kruger operations facility for quite a while, training facility and an upgrade facility.
Thank you. All right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to share tonight? I think
so. I've had a lot. I've had a lot of folks reaching out to me about Project Lazarus really quick. For those, there's some people who don't know what that particular program is. So the way I'm going to explain it is this, because everyone's talking about this idea of the potential fake ET landing, or potentially a real landing. And disclosure, and what happens if one of those three or some combination of those three occurs, right? Specifically in this scenario, let's say NASA or some defense agency detects a large armada or group of objects moving in from far space, extrasolar, into the solar system through the Kuiper belt. At that point, the programs probably already know what's going on, but they have to have a reactionary plan on how to deal with this. Now, why would something like that happen? Well, I know Penny and others and I have all looked at this short movie video called Raka that's put out by Oats Studios. For those of you who haven't seen it, to me, it's probably the closest that I've seen to a black AI nanite infected Draco they're actually invading a planet under order. That's what that actually looks like. If you want to go watch that video, it's a little startling. It will trigger you, but it is, in my opinion, probably the closest thing I have seen to the way the Draco actually come in and try to squash a species on a planet. Now, not all species are done that way by the Draco, but if you rebelled, for example, let's say we put the Cabal down, right? Everyone talks about putting the Cabal or the Illuminati down. If the Prince was not getting feedback, he would call for backup from the Armada. And this is where you'd see this large group of ships come in and they would do an invasion. They want to immediately put a quash on any sort of military action here on the planet. And that's where the Raka is the outcome of that squashing effect. Scenario 1, right? They win. Scenario 2, exactly. Scenario 2, essentially what you see in scenario 2 would be Project Lazarus. Now, the way Project Lazarus works is essentially, we already know that we have ships and personnel who are in the programs and copies of people out in the programs. What if we actually could reactivate assets back here on Earth? We would tell them to rehome to a certain location physically. And if they gave their authorization to actually continue helping the programs out, we would give them either a new body, upgrade their body, fix their body, and also give them back their memories and training and all that stuff, right? We could regress them back into a 20-year-old body, give them a 2.0 upgrade, give them their memories back, and then put them back in armor and weapons. That actually isn't that hard to do. We already know they have the technology. They're already doing it on the moon. We know this happens. The question is when would they do that? Why would they do that sort of program? Well, if they needed assets on the planet and they did not want to disclose that they have SSP assets in orbit fighting, that would be the perfect excuse to use assets they already have trained down here, like you and I. They would take us, they would get a message via the 911 system that would say, be a certain alphanumeric message. And all of a sudden, for some reason, you and I would get up out of our seats, go get in our cars and drive to some other location. We'd magically show up there. There's already tents set up, a ship's there, and people are doing the upgrades. We'd basically walk in and do the upgrade. We give the authorization for them to upgrade us. And at that point, we're back in the fight. And essentially the way that would work is once we got back in the fight, they would pull up our old records from the programs. People like Peter who have access to those programs would look us up and go, oh, you're so-and-so. Okay, at this point, we need to give this person this rank back. We're going to put them through a reorientation training skill test. And then we're going to put them back in armor and do weapon tests. And we're going to send them back up to a certain location. And basically, we're helping defend Earth while our actual fleets are out trying to fight off this armada for a while. So in scenario 2, we could win. So it's not that far-fetched that that could happen. But the idea is that Project Lazarus essentially was a stopgap measure put in place by many people on the triumvirate to make sure that we had something in place in case somehow they didn't catch this happening out in the Kuiper Belt, or they had enough time to do this before they got close to Earth.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Very fascinating. Okay, so we have some questions from the audience members.
Okay.
Someone here would like to know about do you know anything about the Anunnaki as described by Barbara Marciniak?
So let's talk about the Anunnaki really quick. So there's some interesting things that people have to kind of get in their head, right? First off and foremost is the city of Ur in Babylon. That city is extremely important because the Anunnaki, that was their seat of power on Earth. Why is that city important? Well, Noah was born there. Abraham was born there. All these people who are big religious figures, and Abraham was also the father of the Muslim faith, the Islamic faith, and he's also the father of the Judaic faith. But he was born in Ur. And that city was actually ruled by what I would call a group of Zeta Reticulans who actually spoke a very distinct version of Babylonian. If you watch the movie The Fourth Kind that has Mila Jovovich in it, she does a recall in there and play the actual video plus her doing the reenactment video alongside of it. And the scene in there, the guy actually is speaking in this version of Babylonian or Akkadian, which is also a dialect of Babylonian. And essentially this ET is being channeled through the guy and basically tells them exactly who he is, what he's doing, and what he's going to do to this human. But the idea is that these Anunnaki essentially there's two different versions of this, right? You had the original group that came down that formed the slave race that basically took man and reformed them into, yeah, that's the exact movie right there. They basically took this sort of like crude rudimentary form of humans and turned them into us, Homo sapien. Then you had a second group, the Zeta Reticulans, come in behind them, and essentially they actually ruled from Ur, basically wanting more gold to be mined off planet. And there are a lot of people that have studied, and this is the actual Babylonian cuneiform and all the stuff that goes back to the actual relationship to that. But the idea is essentially the Anunnaki, there's multiple groups that have taken part in that particular title in Anunnaki, those who came from the sky. And with this particular discussion, we know that a definite second race was involved, meaning the Syrians were one group who came from Sirius B and Sirius C, the Dogon, the Egyptians, and the Mayans and Toltecs, and a whole bunch of talk about them specifically. The second group is this group that was the Zeta Reticulans who came in and essentially used humans to continue mining, but they actually also continued quote unquote genetic changes to humankind. So that would be my answer to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we're gonna wrap this up. This is gonna be the last question tonight.
Okay.
Was Jehovah a Draco?
Well, I would actually say no, but what I would say is Yahweh could be a good close contender. The reason why I say that is the original term Yahweh was actually, okay, so this is me speaking as having a background in a PhD in divinity and a master's in religion. So the Canaanites actually worshipped a god called Yahweh. Yahweh. It was a warring god. The interesting thing is when you actually draw what's called a sigil of Yahweh, it actually forms a crown with teeth. And that particular sigil essentially is the actual art form representing the fact that this could in fact have been like a Draco, an actual lizard ruling over them and gaining energy, or Loosh, as DW and CG talk about a lot, right? I would say that the Yahweh term would be more close to that. But the Jehovah term, I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily a Draco or not.
I heard that the priest class were just playing a practical joke on the people, and because Yahweh is a sound donkey makes, so they just wanted to. But anyway, obviously I can't confirm that. Okay, well, thank you very much, Johan, for coming on here tonight at such short notice. Thank you for sharing your insight about Kruger and LOC. And we'll be sure to get you back on here to answer more audience questions. And I did get the last video we did transcribed, so I got all notes of all that for audience members. If you want to check that out as well, you can do that. Go to SuperSoldierTalk.com. And do you happen to have a website where people can find you?
Actually, what I would recommend, I got a little shameless plug here real quick.
Go ahead.
A friend of mine, Ted Alexander, is running a video forum that we're doing via YouTube. It's called the Red Pill Cafe, Quantum Red Pill Cafe. We've done, I think, 4 or 5 videos now. I've done 4 or 5 with him. And we're actually doing a live call-in and chat August 17th with anybody. I think it's August 17th or August 24th. Let me look here real quick. It is.
Is this the channel?
Yes, Johan? It is. That is it. Yes, it's August 17th. We're going to be doing a live chat with people who want to come in. It's a live Q&A. Any questions that want to be asked, we'll be asking. We'll have some other stuff too. Like we usually start talking about email correspondence because he and I get quite a bit of email through that. Then we'll go into like certain topics we want to talk about, and then we do like a Q&A section. So if you're interested in continuing some of this discussion with Ted or myself, please feel free. You can join us on there. Keep an eye on it, and we'll be glad to answer any questions you guys may have.
Excellent. Thank you. Be sure to check that out. I'll put the link in for this as well in the video description. Okay. Well, once again, audience members, thank you for, thank you for listening in, and also be sure to subscribe to this channel and check out my website, Neological Tech, support the work I do. And so we'll see you all here next time. Have a good night or good day or wherever you may be. Bye-bye.